Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Of course, it's an honor to be here today and with all these incredibly smart colleagues from around the world who have kind of enlightened me today on lots of new topics. I am an economist. I spend my time advising people. I mean, I kind of look like Rasputin, sort of, right? But that's part of my job, is to sit in the middle of conflicts and weigh the pros and cons of how things work when the economy and the environment collide, and how we can't always think about it as a zero-sum game. And we have to think about how to set up society so it's a positive-sum game, so that there are chances for people to both prosper and without totally at the expense of the environment, and to understand how people affect nature and how nature affects people. So these last 3 decades of my research and my life have been getting into the middle of all these different conflicts to try to understand how and why and if people will do, quote, the right thing at the wrong prices, which non-economists are very hopeful for in terms of solving world problems, whereas economists want to get people to assume they're going to do the right thing at the right prices. And we spend our time trying to manipulate financial incentives so that people go about their daily business, don't have to ponder it every moment when they're thinking about trying to protect the environment. But I don't have to tell you that so much here in Sweden. I mean, it's much more an issue in the United States in terms of trying to get the prices right. I mean, like Pamela, I came here as a student in '84 down to Hedersdoktorsföreläsningar and Stockholm University to work with 2 of the founders of environmental economics, Peter Bohm and Carl Mailer. And I came for the year. And as you can see by my name, it's an Americanized version of Shogren. And at some point, I think my grandfather got tired of people mispronouncing it and asking him how he spelt it, so he changed it to Shogren. And even then, it's a little bit tricky for folks. So I'm going to talk today about some work that I've been doing with 2 Frenchmen and thinking about both market and non-market economics. So when I think of economics, the way I define it is creating value through trade. And the whole purpose of defining economics this way is to stress that the world is not zero-sum, right? That if we trade, we both can gain some sort of well-being. And you got to remember, economics is not finance. And the way to keep them straight is finance talks about maximizing wealth. Economics talks about maximizing well-being. So if you can keep those 2 things separate, then you won't ask me about Wall Street or anything like that, because I'm horrible at making money. I'm great at philosophizing, but I'm horrible at making money per se, right? So what I focus in is trying to understand well-being and trying to understand how the world is not a zero-sum. And so, you know, Adam Smith, back in 1776, wrote The Wealth of Nations, and I think economists' whole job for the last 240 years has been to try to explain that book in the sense of it shows that we don't have a zero-sum world, right? And that we have to think about it in terms of exchange to create value that then we can use to get the things we want. And our main organizing principle is the market. And we don't think of the market the way most people do. You know, if you think of a market, you think, well, I can go to buy some new shoes. And that's great. Or you can go buy some groceries and buy organic vegetables or gene manipulated vegetables, right? That's not the quite word I wanted to use, but that's what we think about it. But when economists think about the market, we think about it as the greatest information gathering device we ever discovered, right? Because embedded in that price is all the supply and demand around the world, all the preferences around the world, all the push, all the pull, all the droughts, all the floods, all the everything. And for us, that little price is like a black hole of information, right? Infinitely small and infinitely dense. And so we're super excited about markets for its ability to capture all that information. Not perfectly, and they break down, and they fall apart. And really, that's been a big part of my job, is to understand market failure and how the market doesn't function as well as it could, and why the market breaks down, just like a car mechanic would do. If you took it in and said, my car doesn't run, well, okay, that's our job, is to then take apart the market and find out where this information gathering is going all wrong. And so I put on here a twig on the branch of economics, but that's what I've specialized in, is market failure, both from thinking about it as an economist and thinking about it incorporating biological and ecological concerns, at the same time as thinking about it when rationality breaks down and when the institutions break down. So today's talk is about commitment, and thinking about commitment as a social construct, as a concept of commitment to a few things. In every economy, we need trust. And either you trust your neighbor, you know, in the University of Wyoming College of Business, our motto is now business by handshake, which sounds like what a cowboy would say, you know, out from the Wild West, right? My word's my bond, lady, and a handshake is all we need. Well, that's how we sell our whole business, but it's just this whole notion of commitment. Most places we need contracts, right? We actually design a contract and try to figure out how it works. But what we're going to look at today is this notion of commitment through a solemn oath. Now, oaths are not typically something you study in economics, because an oath is almost a sacrament. It's almost a rite, right? It's almost a ritual. And the idea of an oath being different than a promise, the idea of an oath being different than a handshake, the idea of an oath being different than your word, right? The oath is something more binding. And why is it more binding, right? And what does that have to do with economics or environmental economics or global politics? Well, pretty much everything, in terms of actually trying to get commitment when you don't have a market price, and trying to get commitment in terms of getting people to follow through, so you create the trust that you need to have in order to facilitate exchange, to create value. So in my mind, they're all linked together. When we start talking about this generally in front of economists, they're like, well, what are you guys even doing? Why are you doing this? Because what does a non-enforceable intrinsic commitment to holding oneself to a higher standard of integrity have to do with economics? Well, in most of the problems I deal with environmental problems. There is no market. We can't buy and sell most of these things by the pound on the auction block. So if you're going to deliver the public good and you're going to deliver some sort of social program, there's got to be some form of commitment that you can follow through on. And what I'm interested in is how you think about the value for nature, how you think about changes in the value for nature, how we tell white lies for the social good, and how we contribute to and vote for the public good under these commitments of an oath. Because in economics, real economic commitment is just the exchange of money. You give me money, I give you the goods, we're committed, right? And your revealed action is the truth. If you really wanted it, you'd pay for it, right? And if you didn't want it, you didn't pay for it. And for us, that is real economic commitment. And so when we're trying to go out and understand commitment in the public good, and you can't make these exchanges, how do you create the sense of commitment that we have here? And most of the economics profession focuses on this idea. Real economic commitment, we call it revealed preferences. When you make a choice and you buy a car, you've revealed your preferences. When you make a choice and you buy, well, my actual clothes are somewhere in the world between here and Reykjavik. So this is my rented jacket, I have to admit here. So thank you, the nice people of Uppsala, for getting my jacket for me. But, right? So this would not be a revealed preference. Right? This would be a borrowed preference in this case, or a loaned preference in this case. When we think about environmental economics, we're thinking about these commitments to truth for non-market goods and services. We're thinking about protecting biodiversity. We're thinking about climate change. We're thinking in terms of missing markets. So when an economist thinks about this problem, there's either markets or missing markets. And what's the commitment device? Well, nowadays I've seen more and more what you could call green oaths. It's a hard word, oaths. There's the Paris Pledge, right? That is an oath or a vow. There's a pledge for the oceans you can sign up for. Iceland has a tourist pledge. Have you seen it? If you go there, you can take the Icelandic tourist pledge, which one of them was, I will do, no, how did they phrase it? Basically, I'll do things that are on my bucket list without killing myself, which I think must be hiking around a volcano or something like that, right? So they had this whole list of things that only make sense, but you can sign up for it. And these green pledges, I'm starting to see them come out all over the place in different environmental communities as a way to look at this environmental, this commitment device. So for economists thinking about markets, again, as an information gathering source, for environmental economists, we think about it in terms of this intersection between markets and missing markets. It's not, there's reasons why they're missing. And the question is, how can we fill them? We've talked about cap, well, we haven't talked about it, but you've heard a lot about cap and trade in terms of climate change emissions, CO2 emissions, in terms of acid deposition, in terms of lots of different ways to put scarcity back into the problem by essentially creating a market where one has not existed, or by putting a price on. And then the way I also think about it is, like, most of the world doesn't organize their thinking by markets or missing markets. Markets is not their principal way to look at the world. Their principal way to look at the world is the science, the natural science, and thinking about how we strip things down. At the same time, the market's happening all around them. That's not their focus, and that's fine. Or there's a tendency to think about environmental policy again because you need to do the right thing at the wrong prices. And the whole notion of sort of moving people in that direction, either through guilt or shame or working off of some sort of emotion, that's tricky, right? That's outside the economist's job. That's more of a marketing job or more of a behavioral impact. But when we try to solve these problems, you've got to look at it from all three perspectives. At least I have. And it's interested me and has kept me busy for the last 30 years because there's no shortage of problems, no shortage of issues that can't be addressed when you're thinking about the basic human tendency of wanting to make choices to increase the odds good things happen and bad things don't. Right? You fall right into this morass of trying to understand how to help policymakers make decisions. So I spent a year in the White House for Clinton and Gore as their climate guy. And my job in there, of course, was not to tell them anything other than to offer up options by framing the problem this way so they could see where the drivers, the political drivers, the economic drivers, the ecological drivers were coming from while they had to make the decisions. Right? If I only gave them half the story, I wouldn't be doing my job. So the first experiment, so even though I'm working on these big ideas, I do a lot of my work in the laboratory, like Pamela. I spend a lot of time doing economics experiments, setting up situations, setting up markets, setting up trades, setting up decisions. The classic one is, Bengt was talking about last night, the ultimatum game. If you've got $100 or 100 crowns, and you make an offer to someone, if they accept it, the deal's done. If they reject it, you both get 0. And to understand why most people don't offer up 1 crown, keep 99, and have that other person take it. Because for an economist, 1 is better than 0. But for the rest of the world, rejecting 1 because you're so greedy to keep 99 is a cheap price to pay to stick it to that person for being so greedy. Right? So we set up these institutions, these auctions, these markets to try to understand how we think about these oaths and pledges and vows and your word is your bond. And thinking about the oath as a means to commitment. And so we've been working with some social psychologists who focused on what they call the foot in the door technique. So the foot in the door technique is once you get a person committed to do action A, if you then follow up with another question, they're more likely to do action A. So if you need money, say when you're visiting the United States and you're in downtown Denver and you need to go panhandling for an extra $5 or whatever, make sure you ask someone the time first before you ask them for money. And if you ask them for the time first, they've just given you away something for free, which is the time, and your chances of getting the $5 go up by 50%. I've tried it. You know, as a scientist, this was my mad scientist experiment, was to walk around downtown Denver trying this myself, asking, I mean, it looks like I might need money. So it's like, you know, give me can I borrow $5 from you? And they're like, no. And then I switched it during the day, said, you know, what time is it? Can I have $5? And they're like, well, maybe, okay, you know. So you can try it. And what we wanted to do here was to get people committed to the truth. And so we asked them to sign an oath. And we did this in Paris, primarily, where we've been running these experiments. I, the undersigned, swear on my honor that during the entire experiment I will tell the truth and always provide honest answers, sign and date it. Now, the thing about this is it's voluntary, it's signed, it's private, it's only public in the sense that a monitor's there who gives the paper, but doesn't act as a witness per se, doesn't have to sign it. And this simple notion of asking people to commit to the truth has an amazing impact. Now, what did we do? Well, we've run every economic experiment we could think of under the sun to try to understand how this works. There's a thing called the second price auction, which won a Nobel Prize for William Vickery. And the second price auction is pretty straightforward ex post. You bid in an auction, and if you're the second highest bidder, if you bid the highest, you pay the second highest bidder's price. Why should that get you to tell the truth? Well, because if you bid too high, somebody could bid above your bid and your value, and you end up paying more than you wanted to. If you bid too low, someone could bid above you, and you could have missed out on something that was profitable. And the push is to get you to tell the truth, this second price auction. So phenomenally, this thing works sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. But when we put them under oath, it worked. I mean, you want to fit a regression line with a slope of 1 and a constant of 0? We put them under oath, boom. Now, we've been trying to get people to reveal true preferences for the environment for 5 decades now. Under oath, or when you're asking people without the oath, and you have a hypothetical situation, people, of course, exaggerate. And you put them into a real case, people all of a sudden give you zeros just to get out of the auction and get out of the survey. Under oath, all that went away. So that was our first hint that maybe this was going to be helpful for thinking about these environmental problems. Yeah, that's what we talked about. And we also did it for adopting a dolphin. Boom, same result. People bid the truth as we could best describe it, because I mean, who doesn't like a dolphin? Who would bid 0 for a dolphin besides maybe a tuna fisherman, right? I mean, who would bid 0 for nobody? We've done it for adopting tigers in China. Again, the demand curve, which we think is so important to understand how nature affects people and how people are going to affect nature, we now have a demand curve that we're more likely to believe in than one that's skewed or one that's biased. There's different types of oath: duty to the job, oath to the task. We haven't even really explored those yet in nearly 10 years of work. We have focused in on one oath, and that's been the honesty oath. Another big one is providing a public good, where you actually try to get people not to assume the worst about their fellow humans, which is to free ride. I'm going to wait for you to do the job, and I'll just kind of enjoy the public good you provide. Once we do the oath, what we find is we've disconnected this strategic behavior from people, and you just ask them to do what they think is the truth in their head. The response times in terms of thinking about things go down, because now instead of me thinking about what you're thinking and you thinking about what I'm thinking and I'm thinking about what you're thinking and what everybody's thinking at the same time, and I know that you know that I know that you know, just do what's right at the wrong price. And we've increased public good provisions by nearly 40% with this technique. Coordination games, when you think about coordination games, I think they define most environmental policy, in which you have multiple equilibria, some of them way better than others. And how do you get unstuck out of a bad equilibrium? Well, we put people under oath, and we allowed them to create trust between each other. And our coordination in this case went up by 60%, which is pretty huge. In terms of what we did relative to any other institution, financial and otherwise. White lies for the social good. This one is a little bit interesting, in the sense that when, a white lie just means, when someone asks you, does this suit look good? Or if I ask you and you say, oh yeah, it looks great. Right? And, you really weren't serious about it, but, you just wanted to make me feel good. And it was just way easier than saying, no, you could have done better. Right? So if we have that type of lie that improves everybody's life, we try to get rid of that with the oath. That was hard, unless you put them in a loaded environment that says, if you lie, you're a liar. But we had to make it that plain to people to overcome this type of tendency. Now, it doesn't have as much to do with the environment as a lot of other things, but it's still one of these kind of interesting findings. So what have I learned here in my time? And I still believe that economics is a powerful organizing device. Right? And I still believe that what underpins this notion of trying to pull in all this extra information is useful. I think of commitment as a social construct based on institutions. I think of rationality. And I know Thomas talked about rational policy for animal health and welfare and thinking about it. And rationality is also a social construct. And if you can use these non-market tools to help the market, you should do it. Truth-telling without markets is pretty slippery in the sense that I can create it, but now there's got to be a limit to it, right? I mean, if I make you take an oath every second of every day, what's the point of it, right? It's going to wear out. Now I need a super oath, or now I need a blood oath, or now I need an oath on your children, or now I need an oath on your mother, or now I need some other kind of oath. So the question is, when you're trying to combine markets and non-markets, there's limits to both, and we're understanding them. And so when we think of something big like climate change, we think about the Paris Pledge, and we think about the whole idea of trying to get this non-market institution embedded in a market economy, a globalized market economy. We start small and we keep building up, and we keep testing the real world to see if it functions like we think it does. And I've learned a lot. And hopefully it's helpful. No guarantee. It's science after all. You might hit some dead ends. But I think that it's helped me be a better advisor, which has ultimately been my job, is, like I said, standing in the middle between all these conflicting interests and try to find some common ground or find some common space between them. Thank you very much.